Welcome back, everybody. We haven't even stopped recording, but I'll cut this in two. For those of you joining us again or didn't even catch the first of these two videos, I'm joined today with my special guest, Salimah.
Hello.
Salimah, do you want to introduce yourself at all?
Not really.
No?
But I'll say hi, and I'll encourage everyone to follow along on their own computers by downloading the data on your data mining website as well.
That's right. So you can follow along today with either episode 1, well, this is episode 4, but part 1 of episode 4, which we just finished recording. And you can also follow along with episode 4.1 that we're recording right now by grabbing the files and the sample files that we're showing you today up on the Data Miner Union's GitHub location, and we can show you that later. So where did we leave off last time, Salimah?
Last time we had appended all of the 10 documents onto one file.
Yeah, we had a sample set of data spread across, in this case, 10 consistently formatted Excel files. And they could be CSVs as well, it doesn't really matter. They came with a bit of a twist. They had the first 9 rows were dedicated to header information, something that was distinct for that file, but didn't really carry on to each different row. And then starting at row 10, we get a more traditional sort of column layout of the data, where each column has a particular data type and a measure. And then below that, for however many rows, is the value for that measure.
While still showing the source of the data in the Excel spreadsheet.
That's right. So the first example that we ended up finishing off with, we were able to go through and actually make use of something PowerQuery does almost natively now in latest builds. Pointed it at a directory, had it create functions for us to transform that data and iterate through all 10 files, and return for us 2 columns that started on row 10, all of their measurements, and execute that on all of the 10 files that were within that set. That's where we ended. What was the piece that we left behind?
All the information at the beginning, how could we delete it?
Yeah, we left this stuff behind.
Important. Yeah. How do we merge that? How do we combine that?
Yeah, what we want is we want this header data back out, but we want it repeated for every row. In fact, I have an example over here of what one of the final outputs are that we're going to aim for. We have the first 3 columns that we can see are produced by what we've already built. So it's going to pull in the source, the relative position, and max depth for us. Next things we want to take something like the file ID. In this case, there's other headers. I have start distance, max depth, min depth. And I want those brought out and repeated for every row for each of those files. Well, to do this, we have to go a little bit more advanced than just out-of-the-box functions that were available up at the top of the ribbon. So quick recap, functions are created by PowerQuery. Out of the 4 things that are created within that function, this transform sample, this is where we're going to be actually giving the instructions that the function repeats.
So could we apply this function to any document?
We can actually apply this function to any document. In fact, you can even call it, so if you were to have a new query, I'm going to pretend out here is a new query. It's not, but it is. What you can do is under add columns, you can actually invoke a custom function. So you can manually create this step where you can go, you know what, let's call that function that I've created or PowerQuery created. And that might actually be a future video, is how do you create your own functions? This one was created for us. And then for that function, it has a parameter field. In this case, it's a single parameter field. You can manually type in a parameter. If it doesn't make sense, it'll return an error. Or you can actually point it to a column that contains that parameter, and it'll execute it for each row. And that's actually what PowerQuery has already done for us way back here, where we started off with just the list of all of the files in that folder. It invoked the function, which is the add column, and it's invoking the function, and it's handing along as a parameter the values that's in the content. So it's actually handing along the binaries. And that's what that function's expecting. And it's creating a table. And we can see down here an example of what it's pulling out for each file. So it's actually executing that one function where it removes the headers for each file. So yes, That was a little bit of a side turn, but I liked it.
Grab a cookie.
Yes, you grab a
I feel
cookie. I'm too busy talking.
Okay, awesome. So I guess the next step is how do we use advanced editor to do what we want?
That's right. So now we're actually going to hop into the advanced editor, which can scare some people because it's not the nicest or friendliest text editor around. There's no color coding to it.
But don't be scared. It doesn't bite.
Don't be
It's not,
scared. Yeah, it can be
it's not
daunting.
sharp teeth, but
No sharp teeth, and even if you do dumb things in here, you're not going to blow up the world unless you have business critical applications built on this. And hopefully by that point, you're enough of an expert in it that you're not going to kill everything.
or Big Brother might be watching you, which is also a problem. But be strong.
You know, I just recently read 1984 again, actually.
Did you again?
It's so topical. But this isn't a politics channel. I don't think we should talk about that. Suffice it to say, I'm Canadian and glad to be one.
You should add some subtle comments. Anti-corporation comment. Actually, you can erase that.
Yeah, no, I might leave it in.
No, leave it in.
All right, guys, we're changing the aspect of this channel. It's no longer about data mining, it's politics mining. No, we'll stay kind of neutral. Anyways, where we're going to be doing most of our work, once again, is actually in the sample file of the transformation. But we wanted to be able to step back a few steps and recover the information from the headers and turn those into columns down here that end up repeating for each file. Well, how do we do that? I'm lazy, so I'm going to do one thing here that I encourage you to repeat as well on your end if you're following along. It won't make sense now, but it will make sense in a few minutes. I'm actually going to grab one of these cells, and it can be any of these values. I'll grab one down here, and I'm going to drill down.
Drill down.
Okay, that's all I'm going to do. And hopefully, if you've enabled your formula bar, you'll actually see what that call looks like. So what it's doing is it's taking the results from the previous step, promoted headers. It's going to the fourth row, and it's returning the result in that column. So I'll just step back to that previous step. It's going to the fourth row, but it's not really, look, what's in the fourth row is 8.26. But if I look at the results here, it's 8.72. Well, that's because this is something funny that PowerQuery and anybody who's worked with indexes before knows. So it's actually returning the value from what is numbered here as row 5. But PowerQuery, somewhat paradoxically, starts its row numbering at 0. This is something I've read. Have you ever worked with indexes before that some start at 1, some start at 0?
Yeah, it can be confusing, and it's different for each application. So
It
it's
is.
good to know that this one.
And it's even inconsistent in the exact same application, where it numbers visually within the user interface, it starts at 1. But if we come into the call here, it's actually pulling from 4. And I can even set that to 0, hit enter, and it returns the first value from the first row. So that's just something to be aware
It's
of.
pretty confusing. It kind of reminds me of the difference between British and Canadian elevators. So I mean, in the UK, you start at ground 1 and then ground 2. In Canada, you start at ground 0 and then ground 1. Or sometimes ground 2 actually is after 0.
Oh, don't even get
Actually,
me
you can
started
erase
on the
that
13th
because-
floor.
Probably irrelevant, but it reminds me of that. The different buildings start at different floors.
Yeah, indexing starts at different floors.
Yeah.
But the moral of the story is the user interface says it starts at row 1. However, indices actually assume it starts at 0.
So just feel a little bit cognizant of that.
The more important part is, what is this structure? It's actually pointing to a table data structure, and it's saying row number and then column by name. So I'm actually going to pop into the advanced editor now, and this is where things may get a little more confusing if they haven't already been confusing. And what I'm going to do is actually take data from a previous state and pull it forward and hold on to it in a local variable. So for those who are familiar with Python or R, this is a very forgiving language. This is M. The language here is M. Seems like we're using a lot of the alphabet for our computer language these days. We have C, we have R, we have M.
And the language of mothers, the language of matrons, the language of other
The language of more data. Actually, I'm curious why it's called M. I'm sure out there is somewhere out there, maybe Ruth from Kerbal knows why it's called M. Regardless, similar to Python and R, we can actually grab a variable that's set further up in the tree, and this variable is forgiving. It's actually going to be whatever is on the other side of the equal sign. In this case, the data file is the complete table that includes the headers. So I'm actually just going to step back to that navigation step so I can see what row -1 these variables are on and pop back into the advanced editor here. So what I'm going to do is give myself a comments, double slashes for comments, header rescue. I'm just going to call this a header rescue, and what's the first thing I want to grab? It's going to be ID, right? So let's name it. So the ID is going to equal, and it's not going to be from this step, from the promote header step. It's actually going to start with the variable data file sheet. So I'm going to start with the data file sheet, so whatever result of that table it is. I'm going to be on the 0th row. The value I want to grab is not in max depth column, it's in column 2. So what we have here is we've returned a value of ID, which is great. Cool, well I want the other stuff up there, and I also want to be able to add ID into the promoted headers as a table value later. So let's just go back and grab all of the other header values I want from my mass editor. So we're going to add a comma up here, and because I'm lazy, I'm just going to copy that call, paste that in here, and change my row number to row 1, and max depth and min depth. Let's do both of those. Are you bored, Salimah?
No. I
No?
didn't say I'm bored.
No, you're not bored? All right, so we got start dist, max depth, and min depth. And we'll just change the row IDs numbers there to 2 and 3. And let's say we end in min depth. So there we go. I can see I've got my ID, I've got my start distance, my min depth, and my min values, and these are all single locally controlled variables. So I can then actually come back up to promote headers, and I'm going to drag it down here, back into the advanced editor, because we can see here the step that it's trying to work with is the min depth. And I actually want it to jump back to the data file sheet. And now it'll work just fine. There we go. So we're now all the way back up to promoted headers, but that wasn't quite what I wanted.
No.
Because what I do want is the removed top rows. So again, advanced editor comes in handy. And I'm just going to grab the results of that table. This is why we save this for the advanced video trick. And we'll press done. So now we end up at the end with the table I want, but also already instantiated in memory is the values that I want to add to the table.
Okay.
So I can then start from this level, and that was bouncing in and out of the advanced editor. I moved my promote headers below it, but I just changed that it's referencing not the last step, but it's referencing the last step where it had anything in it that I wanted. Like any good programmer, indent and comment, headers to columns is going to be our next steps. We do exactly what we want to do. We add a custom column. In this custom column, let's call it ID. You're not going to see the value out here as an option. You're just going to see the columns, but that doesn't mean you can't call it directly.
Okay. Oh,
And look at that.
awesome.
So we know ID is available. We also have start dist, max depth, and min depth. So we can just add those in again, just the same way as we did before. And we'll call that one max depth. As long as your variable in here is named the same as what your variable is out there, it adds it to it. And I'm not going to add the other two, or maybe I will.
Don't do it.
Don't do it? Okay, I won't do it. You get the point. I've added 2. And what we can do is then go, okay, so that's that function that gets iterated over top of. We see it works for the sample file. Will it work on all 10 files or 100 files? So I'll close and load that.
Let's find out.
And I will have to refresh this. Fingers crossed, it's done.
Perfect. Wow.
That's how
In a second.
obviously, the more files you have and the bigger they are, the longer this can take. But if we look at copy 4, we have a different ID. And if I get the same ID everywhere, maybe we did something wrong, but we don't get the same ID everywhere. We actually get 10 different variants. So we've now gone into the file that was structured with a split between header and columns, and we've re-pulled it out so everything's occurring in columns, retaining our source and retaining our discrete values and pulling in our columns.
Awesome. What if we turn those top 7 rows into a pivot? So we pivot it just to make the column names, all of those. And then we can I guess, change the values of those columns to duplicate it. Is that a possibility as well?
Actually, it is. It is. That was the other method, but to do it that way, and maybe I'll do something on that,
Yeah.
you actually have to create two different file extraction functions.
Crazy.
The first file extraction function does what we did in the first video, where it
Right.
just ignores them and pulls up the two columns starting at row 10.
Yeah.
The second file extraction function ignores anything below row 10
Yeah.
and pivots the data
Right.
and then just returns those values.
Then you can merge the two.
And then you can merge the two because the sources from both of them are
Right.
coming from the same thing, and then you just expand outwards.
Okay, I think I probably, if I did it by myself without seeing how you did this, I would have done it that way.
Probably would have just created two file extraction
And then
functions
closed it,
and
yeah.
then called two separate functions. Yeah.
Right, yeah.
This was just a way to get into the M editor because you can do your method without touching the M editor. You just create two different file extraction functions and call them both on the same data set.
Right, yeah. It was good to see how the M editor works a little bit more though. So
Although, you know what? I'll make a promise. If there's an interest, if I get more than 5 likes to this video, I've only got about 50 followers so far,
yeah.
then Salimah can record that example.
Oh, wow.
Although I think Salimah,
Let's see how this goes down.
yeah. So come on, guys, 5 likes and we'll get Salimah to do more work. On that note, actually, I think now is a pretty good time to sign off. Hopefully it didn't go too wandering and sideways and it made a little bit of sense. And thank you, Salimah, for joining me.
No problem. I hope I added some value without distracting the topic. But yeah, I thought it was quite helpful.
Well, I think
I thought it was excellent.
at the very least you kept me saner than normal. So don't feel like I'm speaking into a vacuum. And for anyone who's interested, I have invited Salimah to actually do a few of her own sort of Power BI, PowerQuery, and not just Power BI and PowerQuery, but also DAX. She has been diving into DAX and doing some really cool things with it lately.
Yeah. I guess I can show you how to bring up some tables upon selecting a filter, for example. But yeah, there are some cool things we could touch upon
Yeah.
next time.
So if we haven't scared her off, I'm more than happy to have her come back. Without that being said, if you're new to the channel, feel free to like and subscribe. I'd love to have you back. Salimah will be around as long as she wishes to be around to help out with any of the other videos too. So thank you.
Take care.
Take care.